And just checking on time, do we have the full time slot today?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So now you should my screen and then go into presentation mode. And since I can no longer really see everyone, I'm letting on you, David, to let me know if anything comes up. So just holler if something looks funky. But I'll go ahead and start. So thanks everyone for having me. The lovely plus side of COVID is that I get to present from my home in Bozeman, Montana, to all of you lovely folks in beautiful California. So I hope you guys are doing well this evening. A little bit about myself. That's me. I am the U.S. Program Coordinator and Adaptive Management Coordinator. This photo on the right is always the first one that I show because it's a beautiful example of connectivity. This is in Banff National Park up in Canada. And if you notice, there's a land bridge. And can you guys see my mouse when it moves? Do you see that? You do? Great. So perfect. You can see this bridge that connects one side of the highway to the other. And that's a beautiful example of connectivity. And I always like to start my talks off by showing that. So I'd also, let me just shrink. 1 second. I need to just make sure that I can still see you guys while I go to the next slide. Okay, so next I'd just like to acknowledge that I live in ancestral lands of the Cheyenne, Salish, Kootenai, Crow, Blackfeet, Shoshone, Bannock peoples. I encourage you guys to visit this website, Native Land, if you're curious. It's a really great map that shows all of the native territories around the world. A little bit about me. This is my home. So this is Bozeman, Montana. It's a mix of mountains and prairies and wide valleys filled with everything from developments and cities to active ranching communities. That is my loving Labradoodle, Oscar. So we go on lots of adventures with my partner, and then that is our 77 VW bus that we also love to go on adventures on. So I had to throw that one in there. And I owe my introduction to the wildlife world to sage grouse, to a bird. I started with the UC Davis lab of Gail Patricelli doing a wildlife study on sage grouse in Wyoming. So I have a soft spot for birds in my heart, and sage grouse have an especially key spot. So what is Y2Y? Y2Y is an organization and a region, and the region is outlined with this white line here on this map. So it really covers the spine of the Rockies for North America. And that's really important for a variety of reasons that I'll dive into. It's about 2,000 miles long. It covers Canada and the US, 2 provinces, 2 territories, 5 states, and about 75 indigenous groups inhabit this land. We have 28 staff, so we're based in Canada and the US, and then our headquarters are in Canmore, Alberta, which is right here. And so you can see this region is really wide, really long, and it has a lot of different jurisdictions within that. And so Y2Y is not just a region, but it's also an organization. And our goal is to increase connectivity within there. So looking specifically at the US region of Y2Y, we divide it up into key areas. So there's areas that we call core areas. And that's where we have a lot of protected areas. And those include things like national parks and wilderness areas and roadless designations, areas where wildlife can find habitat to do the things that they need to do to survive. And then we have linkage areas, and those are the areas in between. They're vital because they connect the patchwork of lands, and there's a really diverse mix of land types within those linkage areas, and that's where most of our work is. There's private land, there's public land, there's active ranching, there's active communities, and so it's a really complex system that Y2Y works with to achieve our goals. So our mission is to connect and protect this habitat from Yellowstone to Yukon so that people and nature can thrive. And people are a key component of what we do. And they're a real key aspect for us to actually getting our work done on the landscape. We need people to act and behave in certain ways so that wildlife can continue to have habitats that they need to survive into the future. But Y2Y, we believe in connection, not separation with nature. We believe in using science and knowledge, including traditional knowledge, to guide our decisions. And we really value deep collaboration and authentic partnerships. We work with a variety of partners that I'll dive into in the second half. We believe in the power of a big, bold idea, because Y2Y is a big landscape. Like you saw, it's a lot of acreage to go all the way from Yellowstone National Park, all the way up to the Yukon Territory in Canada. And so there's a lot of partnerships within there that we use to achieve that bold vision. And really at the core of it is we believe in hope. We know the climate is changing. We know that wildlife are needing to adapt to those changes. And we believe in the hope that there is a way that both nature and people can survive. So a little bit of history about how Y2Y got started. Initially, it was a gathering of partners. If any of you have been around the Canada-US border, there's an area called the Waterton Peace Parks. And that's often where people would gather around Glacier National Park because it was kind of the central area between the US and Canada. And over the years, people, and these are practitioners, these are people who are working with nonprofits, these are individuals with communities, and they're like, this is an important region. There's a lot of wildlife that live and value and that this area Y2Y supports. I think we have common interests and common goals. And so let's collaborate and let's start to build this vision. And so over the years, they kept meeting and meeting. And then eventually a nonprofit was formed in 1993. And so actually we're two 501c3s for both Canada and the US because we have to be registered for tax purposes on both sides. But we are the same organization. And so that's a little bit of history about Y2Y and how it got formed. It really came out of the idea from a bunch of people that had the same mission and vision and said, let's get together and do this for a long time and make it real. So next, I kind of want to take a step back. I want to ask a really important question. Why is a connected landscape important? Why am I even talking about connectivity? What's the reason that Y2Y strives for this? There's a couple of key components. So ecological function, which is healthy rivers and carbon cycles, really rely on a connected landscape. Wildlife rely on connected landscapes for things like gene flow, dispersal, climate refugia. I'll dive into a few of those in a minute. And then people. So we depend on healthy ecosystems for clean air, access to water, access to recreation opportunities, and then also our economies depend on these natural systems. Things like timber, wood for our houses, they rely on a connected landscape. So I'm gonna dive into just a couple of these in detail, not enough to make your head spin, hopefully, and then I'll focus on what we do to connect these landscapes. So a key component of this obviously is climate change. I acknowledge that you guys are living in California, which is probably seeing some of the most drastic and extreme examples of climate change in the past couple of years. The main takeaway that I want to leave you guys with today is that we know that the future climate will be different. Some places are going to change more and faster than others. We can predict, we can model, but ultimately at the end of the day, we don't know. And protecting nature and keeping it connected is our safety net. It's one of the key things that we can do to help wildlife and people adapt to climate. Some of the science behind climate. there's 8 key metrics that are relevant to regional climate adaptation planning that we use. I just wanted to highlight one of them is bird species refugia. So I'm just going to focus in on that one and not dive into the others. If you have questions, always feel free to ask them at the end. And so with bird species, again, you'll see the Y-to-Y region outlined in this white line around it, going all the way from Yellowstone, which is down here, and up into the Yukon Territory. And so these red areas indicate where the science study has shown that there's a higher likelihood that the bird species will find refugia with climate predictions. And refugia is what a species needs to survive. So it's the refuge. If I need a certain climate, a certain access to, let's say, precipitation, certain food sources, like certain yummy birds, or, I think it's like a key seed species of plants that they used in this study. But I just want to highlight this. And if you have any questions, there's Adapt West. It's a climate resilience data explorer that's available online and is freely available to the public, which is kind of fun. Another study that we've looked at that kind of indicates the key value of connectivity on this landscape is a study by Lala, Burt, and Ripple in 2004. And what they did is they looked at the number of species, historic, and then compared it to 2004 numbers. And the main takeaway is that there's a shrinking range of large and medium mammals on the continental US. However, there's these hot spots where we're still finding a large number of species present. Again, you'll see the Y-to-Y region outlined here and here in the Yellowstone to Yukon region. So why is connectivity important to an individual's animal? Core habitat and movement corridors are important for a variety of different needs. And the main takeaway is that animals need to move. They need different food during different seasons. They need access to mates. They need safe places to reproduce. And they need a way to avoid or maybe change where they are based on these changing climatic conditions, such as wildfires and droughts. I did some research to the Audubon website, and I found this really great study that came out in 2016 from the Nature Conservancy. They published it. And this study looked at 3,000 species of birds, mammals, and amphibians. And the blue lines on this map represent bird species. And they show major migratory routes that are predicted for species to use in a changing climate. And what I thought was interesting was that the Y-to-Y region was outlined as one of those corridors. So it just goes to show that connectivity is important for a variety of different species. And another reason why connectivity is important, because animals can go locally extinct from protected areas. So there's a couple of different examples of this in the US. There's the lynx, the otter, and the fox in different protected areas. And then recently, in the past couple of years, caribou are no longer being seen in Jasper National Park, which is really unfortunate. So animals need to move very, very long distances to find the resources that they need to survive. One of the best examples of this is Pluie. Some of you may have heard of Pluie. She was a gray wolf. Let's see, so in the 1990s, a 5-year-old female gray wolf was collared in Alberta, and that's this first dot here. That's where she was collared. And then she traveled roughly 38,000 square miles in about 9 months. So that's 10 times the size of Yellowstone National Park. She crossed 30 political jurisdictions, so that's different states, different countries, different land management units. She was eventually shot and killed legally in an area south of Kootenay National Park in Canada. But Pluie is a great example of connectivity. And, again, this is in the early 1990s. right about when Y2Y was starting to be formed. And she and other species and other individuals like her kind of led the way to show us, hey, the animals are telling us something. They obviously don't listen to borders. They don't see the Canada-US border. They go where they need to go. And so we need to listen to them and follow their lead. So a major takeaway of this is only 10% of the world's parks are connected. So without this connectivity, we lose some of the benefits of protected areas. We lose the ability for a protected area to really provide wildlife and ecological processes the ability to continue into the future. So we risk the chance with a protected area, if it's not connected, we lose the chance of it becoming a stronghold for wildlife, because we need it to be connected for a lot of wildlife to be able to adapt to climate and also get the resources that they need to survive. Again, I always list the studies in my presentations, and I'll be sending the slides to you guys afterwards. So if you have questions on the science of any of this, this one is from a paper by Ward et al. In 2020. Feel free to reach out to me, and we also have fabulous scientists on staff, so I can answer any of those questions. So what are some of the limits to connectivity? What would stop an animal from moving where it needs to get to? One of the main causes is habitat conversion. This can include things like development, heavy resource extraction, and heavy dispersed recreation. Not saying that housing development is bad or that people living in houses is bad, but it's saying there is a certain place where maybe they shouldn't be as condensed. Maybe there is a way to have that development aligned in such a way that it allows for animal movement through it. Linear infrastructure is another one, such as roads and railways. So if you have a large road across a key habitat for a species such as a pronghorn antelope in this photo, it's going to think a little bit differently about crossing that road. If it's a busy interstate, it's going to have a lot more difficulty crossing that road. And then human-caused wildlife mortality is another key limit to connectivity. And this is things like bears getting into trash and becoming habituated to food sources that aren't natural. We usually say a fed bear is a dead bear, because when animals get into problems, unfortunately, usually it's the wildlife that loses in the end. So I'm going to pause here for a second, and I'll look to the administrator to unmute. Are there any key burning questions, or can I move on to talk about what Y2Y does to increase landscape? Good.
There aren't any questions in the chat, but
I
think you're good.
Could I raise a question audibly? Sorry, I didn't put my hand up in chat.
Oh, no, you're good. Thanks for
Sorry.
talking.
So the outline of the Y2Y region is not exactly a linear rectangle. It's very complicated borders. And I presume that there were a lot of decisions made in what to include and what not to include. And I was wondering if you could go through some of the thinking that defines those boundaries.
Yeah. I'll just kind of go back and slide. So pardon the messiness for a second. I'll go back to the beginning one that had the main region. So what was a key defining factor when creating this boundary was capturing areas that would provide for connectivity between Yellowstone and Yukon, but capturing that high area of the Rocky Mountain region. And so because it's the spine of the Rockies, and there were a couple of key papers that came out in the 90s that looked at the spine of the Rockies and how they were linked. I think another key factor was watersheds. And so I know like down in this area of Montana, the Southwest Montana, and what we call the High Divide, it's a pretty key area for a lot of headwaters. So that was included to capture that. And that watershed goes down into, let's see, where's my mouse? There it is. You know, down around Lewiston and Boise, that captures that southern end. So it looked at a variety of different elements on the landscape. And this is all to be said that the border is fuzzy too. It's not a hard line for us on whether we're in or out of the Y2Y region. We really approach it as a fuzzy border. So I hope that kind of gave some background to that.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate
Okay, great, perfect. And if there's no other questions at this point, I'll dive into the next part of my presentation, which is really focusing on what Y2Y does to increase this landscape connectivity. Hopefully now there's a little bit more of an understanding of what connectivity is and why it's important to wildlife and people. So there's 4 key strategies that we use to accomplish our work on the ground. We work in public lands. So that's like Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, wildlife areas. We ensure that public lands maintain that ecological function and provide the core habitat that we're looking for. And then private lands, we work with landowners to ensure that private lands, especially the valley bottoms, which usually experience a higher rate of development than say the top of the mountain, makes sense, are permeable to wildlife. And so we have a couple of key partners that are land trusts that we work with to conserve that private land. We work on roads. So we strive to make roads safer for people and wildlife throughout the Y2Y region. And then we also focus on living with wildlife. And that's working with communities to reduce wildlife conflict, like that bear that I showed who was getting into trash, who most likely got into trouble and was either relocated or potentially put down because of that conflict if he became a problem bear. So those are the key 4 strategies that we use on the ground and at the policy level nationally to try to get our work done and to truly make change on the landscape, which is really exciting. This work is only achieved through partnerships. We work with communities and agencies all over the landscape. So since 1993, Y2Y has worked with over 450 partners. These include things like natural and social scientists, indigenous groups, businesses, landowners, land trusts, governments, government agencies, NGOs. I'm sure Audubon is in here somewhere. I couldn't find them in the map, but you can see that it's a web. And we really approach our work through this partnership. We always try to think about who are the partners that we can use to make the change on the ground that we want to see. So I want to focus on 3 of those strategies that I talked about and kind of dive into some specifics and show you guys some examples of our work. The first one is restoring grizzly bear connectivity. So you might have noticed grizzly bears are our logo, and you might be asking yourself, why? What is it important about grizzly bears and why are they a key component for our work? Grizzly bears are considered an umbrella species in the Rockies. This is from a gentleman's PhD thesis, and the key takeaway was that of all 16 mammals considered in the Rockies, grizzly bears were the best overall quantitative umbrella. And what that means is that protecting what the umbrella species needs helps the species underneath that. So often large, wide-ranging species, carnivores especially, like grizzly bears, can co-occur with so many other species, and because they require a huge amount of land and resources such to roam and search for food and mates, we use them as an indicator of landscape connectivity. So looking at the grizzly bear population from the past, on the left, you'll see a map that shows the 1920-22 historic range the current range, and then the broad historic range, you can really see how the grizzly bear population has diminished over the years. Fun fact, I think California, I did a little research, saw its last grizzly in 1922. So what you'll see is that throughout this time, grizzly bears, because they're a large, wide roaming carnivore that requires a lot of space, and because people were moving in and hunting was a main cause of their range contraction, what we ended up with was a small isolated population in Yellowstone National Park. And so thinking about the first half of my presentation, where we kind of dove into the details of why connectivity is important, that a species needs to move, it needs to adapt, it needs to find mates, it needs to find different resources if the climate changes. If you had an isolated population now in Yellowstone, that population is threatened. It's not very secure. And so one of the key things that Y2Y is focusing on is restoring this grizzly bear connectivity in the region. So there's key connectivity zones for grizzly bears. There's the North Continental Divide ecosystem, which is up here. That is the area that includes Glacier National Park. And there's the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem down here. Those are the two main population centers. There's a few in the Cabinet-Purcell region as well. And so the green arrows on this map represent not just predicted movement of grizzly bears, but what we're actually seeing on the landscape. We are seeing grizzly bears starting to come back into an area in central Idaho that they haven't been seen since 1945. And so these arrows represent a lot of our work and where we're trying to focus on connectivity. Because our mission and vision is, if we can get this aligned for grizzly bears, and if we can get the landscape ready for large carnivores, they'll be better suited for other animals as well. And so that's a key component of our work. They're not the only species that benefit from our work, but grizzly bears are our main focus, at least in the US portion of Y2Y. And so we reduce wildlife conflict with grizzly bears. We partner with Montana Fish and Game Parks, Idaho Fish and Game, US Forest Service, Wildlife Services, and others. We host public education workshops, such as the one down below, where people are learning how to use bear spray. So for those of you on the call, if you've ever been in an area where there's grizzly bears, you often will have to carry, and you probably should always carry, bear spray with you. It's just a good idea, and it's in case of an encounter, it's in case of an attack. It keeps you and the bear safe. We also help put up electric fencing and bear-proof garbage bins to keep bears out of trouble. A safer bear will get through the landscape, whereas a troubled bear that runs into trouble, it's going to stop. So the next component that I want to dive into is making roads safer for people and wildlife. This is a really key component of our work because roads are becoming, they're a vital thing for what we need as people. We all drive in cars. We all realize we want to get places and go see family members, and having an interstate and a freeway is really valuable to us. However, they also divide the landscape and make it harder for wildlife to get from one side to the other. Why do we as people, why should we maybe value this or care about it a little bit more? And what's interesting to think about is cost. And so there was some research done, and I think it was 2009 by Marcel Hauer. And these costs were compiled from property damage, loss to hunting revenue, human injury, and human fatality. A moose collision costs around $30,000, elk 17, and deer 6,000. So when you look at it in that way, it's like, oh, it's totally economical to stop these things from happening. These are very costly. And for those of you that have been on roads and have seen roadkill, we all know it's possible, and we all know it's something that we would love to avoid. So to date, Y2Y has modified more than 994 miles of roads in the Y2Y region. So working down from the area where I am, down in the southern region, all the way up into the north. We've worked on things like helping to build and implement wildlife overpasses, wildlife underpasses, and then also design competitions so that agencies can see the really exciting innovation and innovative ways that crossings can be designed over busy highways and interstates. So that's one of the things we do. We support wildlife crossings. I partner with state agency departments in Idaho and Montana, and I look for opportunities to integrate wildlife movement needs into their planned road improvement projects. A lot of those are a road that's being doubled or being expanded upon. It's maybe a bridge that they're redesigning. And I say, hey, I see, that you're redesigning a bridge and it's in a key wildlife corridor. How can I help you as a state agency redesign that bridge in maybe a little bit better way so that way it can capture wildlife needs as well? These two examples that I'm showing are from up in Banff and up in Kananaskis country in Alberta. And they're really beautiful examples of what wildlife crossings can be. They can be either over crossings. So the one on the left enables wildlife to move across the road. And then one on the right enables wildlife to move under the road. So we provide resources, connection to experts, and financial support for these crossing structures to be built. I also did a little bit of research, and I've heard about this for a long time, and I'm very excited to see it be built, but I don't know if you guys know. Some of you probably do know, but there's a large wildlife crossing being planned across 101 freeway. I did some research, and there are a variety of species that are going to benefit from this crossing. So this is really exciting. I will love to see this crossing when it's being built and when it's construction. I know it's going to take a while for California to complete it because I think it's going to be the largest in the US, which is really exciting. But hats off to you, California, for leading the way. All right, and the next example is an example of how we protect and restore public lands. So up in northern Idaho, where the star is, there's an area where we have begun a project, and it's called the Bees to Bears Climate Adaptation Project. I always like to show this as an example because it kind of ties a lot of the elements that I've talked about into one project. So this project area is between two mountain ranges that aren't labeled on this map, but there's one here called the Cabinets where my mouse is. And then there's one on the left side, that's the Purcells. Both of those are grizzly bear habitats. And what was identified was that they were having to cross, well, they were really struggling to cross this wide valley that was experiencing a lot of development, a lot of agriculture, and a lot of vegetation change over the years. And so you'll see in the photo from 1916 that we gathered, it was a pretty vegetated and healthy riparian zone along this valley bottom. And then over the years, it became pretty heavily used for agriculture, which is totally fine. Like, we support agriculture. It's a key component of our economies and our livelihoods. However, there was a 250-acre wildlife management area right in the middle of that. And we said, that is a great opportunity. What can we do to increase the connectivity between these two mountain ranges on either side by helping the state agencies make that wildlife management area more sustainable in the future with climate change, and also enables grizzly bears to get from one side of the valley to the other. So we designed with our partners, Idaho Fish and Game and Wildlife Conservation Society. We wanted to increase the climate resiliency of the land. So that's focusing on cool air refugia and cool water refugia. So creating cool pockets where species can find that over the long term. To date, we have restored ponds, we've built stream beds, and we've helped with native seed plantings in this area. Also, local community members have been a key part of this project, doing citizen science data collection. We've done some great bee studies with the local communities and some pollinator gardens. So they actually collected a native seed bank, which is pretty extensive. And then we planted it in 2019, and we're doing monitoring throughout the years to see what pollinators come back to this garden. So this area supports birds, amphibians, pollinators, bears, and ungulate species. That's the bees to bears. A key part, I was talking to my colleague actually about this today because we got an update on it, which was pretty exciting. And she said that some of the locals had referred to it as a pearl necklace of wetlands that migratory birds use during migration. And things like, you know, deer or geese, ducks, swans, and I didn't get a species name, so you can hound me for species names later. But one of the exciting things that we saw was fresh grizzly bear tracks. And so we're really excited because this is a sign of success. We wanted this landscape to be able to support grizzly bears from one side of the mountain range to the other, and fresh tracks just made us really happy. So anyway, that's a little nugget of success that we have. So what are the examples of progress for Y2Y? We have this huge region, we're working at a really large scale, and we're also working at the really small scale to get projects done. Well, from 1993 to 2014, the area grew by half. So from 9 to 14% for strictly protected areas, which is a lot. And this is really a sign that we're able to move the needle on conservation. We're able to protect more lands. For those of you that have heard about the 30 by 30 target, this is a perfect example that things and targets like that are achievable. And so other areas of conservation designation grew from 4% to 23%. Those include areas like private lands with conservation easements, recreation areas, US grizzly bear recovery zones, and some multiple use areas as well. So combined, those two metrics, that's an increase of more than 127,000 square miles, which is bigger than the size of Norway, which is pretty cool. And so we actually need to do some science to update that soon and see what our current numbers are. Another sign of success is that our key scientist, Jody Hilty, is leading the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, to create the guidelines for conserving connectivity through ecological networks and corridors, AKA Guidelines for Connectivity. This is a really great publication that came out this year, and it shows that we can help to increase the value of connectivity around the world. So not just at the Y2Y region, but using Y2Y as an example of how connectivity can be implemented across the planet. And so we're working with practitioners and managers worldwide to really share the story of Y2Y and how we have seen success. Another success that we like to talk about, again, is with grizzly bears. So remember, I showed a map that was highlighting how that Yellowstone population was becoming isolated and separated. And the light blue on this map shows that the grizzly bears are expanding their range and they're getting closer and closer to reconnecting. We're less than 100 miles from connecting these two populations, which is so exciting because this has been in the works for decades. I feel like I'm coming in at the 11th hour for the slam dunk. This is so cool. It's really great to be part of. And just because they're connected, we still have to ensure that the landscape can support them. There's a lot of different land uses that go on in that area between those two populations. And you'll see the one that's just starting to show up in the Bitterroot. So the Bitterroot ecosystem is the grizzly bear recovery zone that doesn't yet have resident bears. And we'll see, maybe they'll start to show up in the next couple of years. I just want to take last moment talk about one bear. So one individual grizzly bear, 927. So 927, similar to Pluie the wolf, was collared by Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks in 2018. And he had a great trip for 2 years with this collar on and gave us fabulous data that help us understand how and where the landscape can better be connected. So I'll kind of use my mouse and walk you through some of the key places that he went. So this is up in northwestern Montana and Idaho. So it's right at the border of those two states. So he denned around here. And then he crossed I-90. So this is a busy interstate. And this is really exciting to see because it shows us where wildlife can cross I-90. There's no crossing there. There's no overpass. There's no underpass. And it's great to see that a grizzly bear can connect that habitat, can connect that landscape. So he kind of showed us, we're kind of following him on where he crossed that interstate. Then he went down into the Bitterroot recovery zone. You'll see that cluster of dots in the south. And then he went back up north to where he lost the collar in 2020. He's kind of our poster child. That's him on the left, handsome fellow. He was looking for love, probably didn't find it. And so he went back up north. But it was really great because we got to have a window into an individual's life. We got to see their migration, see the pattern, see what he was looking for. And we're really learning from him on how we can help connect the landscape right there. So I'm going to wrap it up with just the door is always open for more people to be part of Y2Y. You don't have to live within the landscape to value and appreciate our mission and vision. We have a fabulous newsletter and we just, please stay in touch. We want to learn from you. We want to share. We want to continue to increase connections with people across the world and across the country. A couple different ways to get in touch with us. And then thank you. That's my contact information. So I'll be sure to send that out.
Well, thank you, Hannah. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing your map from the Logline website of the migratory bird pathways. That was great.
Yeah, I found another excellent site on the Audubon webpage that has the climate prediction models for different species. That was really cool. Wow. I mean, the bird people data, you guys have it set. Kudos to you. So yeah, now open to questions and I'll take any and all.
Okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves, but there were a couple of questions in the chat that I'll get to really quick. So how wide is the Y2Y corridor?
How wide? Depends on where. Up in the Yukon, it's really wide. That's a really big landscape. But down around the border, probably its narrowest. And it goes from the corner of Washington to like Glacier National Park. 200, 100 miles? I don't even have a number off the top of my head. Jean, I'll get back to you, Jan, on that one. But somewhere around there, probably like 100 to 200 miles.
Okay. And do you think the proposed infrastructure bill can be utilized for the safety of wild animals?
Yes, absolutely. So although I myself am not active in the DC arena, we have partners who are, and so we are on regular phone calls with them monthly and quarterly to say what is the status of the bill and how can we ensure that wildlife crossings are part of it. There's definitely an opportunity with the transportation funding that's coming, and especially with the Biden administration, there's a lot of opportunities to get that infrastructure into the planning. Huge opportunity for supporting jobs as well. And I think that's something that we're trying to leverage and communicate, is that building wildlife under and overpasses can provide a lot of jobs for people who might need them right now.
And on the subject of the overpasses and underpasses, is there, do you know if there's a ideal distance apart I mean, that they should be, or would one work for a certain area or?
I think really the difference in how they're designed is it really matters what's on either side of that highway. And so there's a couple of key scientists that we'll work with and that will connect with state agencies who are designing these overpasses and underpasses, because there's some key elements that they need. For example, fencing. So fencing should be for about 3 miles on either side of an underpass or overpass to help funnel the animals towards that crossing structure. And sometimes that's pretty hard to accomplish if it goes onto public land, private land, and back to public, or depending on the jurisdiction. So I would say that the design of it depends on the landscape and then what species are needing to cross that road and what that width is. And there's some great examples too in Nevada of really great overpasses that are being used by huge herds of pronghorn as they migrate, which is pretty cool.
Are there any other questions out there?
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, I have a question. Specifically, Y2Y, how are they involved with the 30 by 30 program? How, I mean, specifically, what are you doing on that?
Yeah, great question. It's a little interesting because we're kind of waiting to see how it trickles down to the state level, because Biden just recently made that announcement, which is great. But we're waiting to see how the state agencies take it up. And obviously in places like Idaho and Montana, we have different leadership at the state level. And so it might take a minute. Y2Y can help achieve that 30 by 30 mission by helping to maintain protections for public lands that already have it. So wilderness, national parks, even recommended wilderness. We can help advocate for that at the state level and at the national forest planning level. And then private land also can be contributed greatly to that 30 by 30 mission, that goal. Because private land is very different in that each landowner who conserves their land with an easement, with a conservation easement, it's going to look a little different for each public land or for private landowner. And so what we're trying to do is to integrate private land conversation into the 30 by 30 discussion. And so we'll be working within the next year to really push that forward, but we're also kind of waiting to see how it trickles down to the state agency level. You know, we don't have staff at the national level right now in DC. We'd love to in the future, but right now there's only 3 of us, so.
Yeah, in California, our governor has made, you know, a big move for the 30 by 30 program. But I'm sure Idaho is not amongst that group of philosophical ideas. Yeah.
Is that an individual here in there?
Yeah, it's a little different. It's a little different for sure. And so that's why we have to,
fan and there's 2 lights.
It's really nice.
I think Jan might need to be muted.
Jan, do you have Aline, do you have a question or?
Jan does, yeah, I'm sorry. So,
Okay.
So I wanted to know, of the wildlife that is passing through this area, is the goal that none of it's going to get shot? None of it's hunted. It's an area where they can pass through undisturbed?
Not necessarily. And it depends on the species, but hunting is a key component of some of the livelihoods for the rural communities in which we work. And so although we do not support outright hunting in some areas, we are supportive of individuals that are practicing that tradition, and including tribes and indigenous cultures. I will say that is a very, it's an interesting line to walk, as a conservation organization. We love individuals, we love species, we love mammals, I love elk, and I also greatly appreciate an elk burger. It is really amazing to have food on my plate that I know where it came from, and I know how it was harvested, and I know the life that it processed. So there's a tricky line there, and I'll be open with that. I'll say that is a hard line as a conservationist to find. And so there's a question in the chat on that grizzly bears. So grizzly bears are protected from hunting because they're an endangered species. And so in the past 5 years, you may have seen on the news, there's been some back and forth on whether grizzly bears get listed or not, or whether they get taken off the list and put on to state control. And so if they were to be taken off the endangered species list and put onto state control, at that point, the states could initiate hunting for things like grizzly bears, and they could put a quota for grizzly bears. And so again, really tricky as a conservation group because we need support from these communities where these bears are ending up. And if they have a hunting value, we don't want to see those bears get shot. We don't want to see that. Their population for Yellowstone is not connected. I don't support hunting of grizzly bears. That's my line. So they are protected right now, and we hope it stays that way.
What about wolves?
So wolves. Okay, so you're pushing my knowledge of the week's news because Gianforte, Montana's new governor, just passed a new bill for wolf hunting in Montana. And so wolves are legal to shoot if you can prove that they're threatening livestock property or like threatening your family. So there's been some changes to recent legislation on that. And I would have to get back to you because literally it just happened this week in our state legislature because we got a new governor this year and there's going to be some changes. But yeah, so unfortunately wolves, anyway.
Okay, so not what I wanted to hear, but I kind of suspected that might be the case. In the case of the lands that you have organizations that are out protecting them, so the lands that they're acquiring, you can prevent hunting on those or people killing the animals. On private lands and maybe connector things, maybe the US Forest Service, those are ones that you can't control as well. Is that true? Like if you have an agreement with a ranch that you say like, well, can you let wildlife move through? They say, yeah, but now if we see a wolf, eating our cattle, then we have to shoot the wolf. Is that what or are you offering? So like the American Prairie Reserve, who spoke last month, they have an award program for landowners who do wildlife friendly things, such as like reduce the fences for pronghorn and things like that. And they actually pay them for that. Is that something that you guys are looking at?
We do not do that with private landowners. We take a little different approach from APR in that we can work with the landowner to help them design their conservation easement, and we can help put a hunting restriction on that conservation easement. But because our landscape is a really mixed patchwork of land ownership, and we're not like APR in that we're not trying to, their goal is that vision of that national park within that area. And Wide is a little different in that we're trying to just increase the connectivity through in that area, but it's not going to take the form of, say, that American Prairie Reserve model where it's within that area. Ours is different, and that's kind of why I said that border is fuzzy for Y to Y, because we know the spine of the Rockies are important, but we're not drawing a hard line around what's in or what's out of the Y to Y region. We just want connectivity to be enabled through that zone. And so we will, to answer your question, Jan, we will absolutely work with a landowner If we're helping to put a conservation easement and protect that land for connectivity, we'll absolutely work with them to say, you know, what's your policy on hunting? Yeah.
Okay, and then some organizations, so I know the one, as I told you, the way I even found you was through Vital Ground.
Yep.
They actually acquire land on behalf of the grizzly bear. So they're
Yep.
not looking for anybody to hunt the grizzly bear. So
Exactly.
and you do have a bunch of different organizations, you know, involved in doing this. So, okay, so I'm just trying to understand your model is a little bit different. So, yeah, and when do you guys have a goal, a future goal for when you think all this stuff is going to be connected?
First thought, let me chime in on Vital Ground. So Vital Ground is one of our main partners that we work with. And we work with them really closely to identify land that is needed for connectivity. And what they will do is they'll help hold the easement because they're a land trust. And YY doesn't hold land. So we can't be that easement holder for the private land parcel. So that's my first thought that I wanted to throw in there for Vital Ground. We work with them really closely and have a very similar mission. And then the second, I think it will never be done. There will always be people moving to this region. There will always be an increase in infrastructure. There will always be a greater demand for some of the resources that this landscape provides. And so therefore, there will always be a need for us to work on connectivity in this region. I don't think it's ever going to be done, which is kind of crazy to think about, but at the same time, it makes me really excited. I'm okay with that. I like that. If it was all done,
Hey, guaranteed lifetime employment.
yeah,
As we used to say in a different industry. But okay, thank you. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Did you have a follow-up question? Or sorry.
This is Eric.
I had a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Eric. Hi, Eric.
For the wolves, especially with the new influx of money into the general economy, if we just paid for any wolf that even looked at a cow, rather than make it, a hard process, you had to prove that the wolf would kill something, and just go all out and make sure that any landowner, livestock, just pay them money right away, and that way eliminate that need to shoot it because of your loss of livestock. When if you can make more money, you don't even have to haul it off to be slaughtered.
Yeah, I wish that could be a solution. I wish that could be as simple as that. I think what is a key element of the West is the identity of feeling threatened by carnivores. This is something about manifest destiny and how settlers came to the West, and this idea that carnivores were an ultimate threat. Grab the children, the wolves were coming. And so I love that idea. I just don't know if it'll work at the end of the day, because I think there's a part of culture that it's going to take many generations in the West for people to understand and accept that I can live with grizzly bears, I can live with wolves. I've done it since I was a young kid. I always hike with bear spray. Second nature. It's just what I do. And so it's just going to take a while. But Eric, if someone has that pile of millions, let's try to do it.
The amount of money being put into the infrastructure, that could be a real game changer. As far as just in the past, I know they've had to, litigate whether the wolf really did kill that cow or not. And if you just automatically assume it did, and then pay the money right away, no hassle, you could save a lot of, excuses to shoot the wolves.
Yeah, and so working with the landowners to provide them with the tools they need to feel less threatened. That's something that helps too. I think I see Dave had his hand up.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Oh, Dave, go ahead, Dave. I didn't see.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to spending a week in Yellowstone in June. I'm on with Naturalist Journeys. You may have heard of them. I don't know. Are you active with the, if you will, the tourism industry in your geography and getting them on board and communicating your mission to, you know, the thousands and thousands of people who visit Yellowstone every year?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to say we can be more. We can be more of that. We've been pretty good in the past 10 years about working quietly behind the scenes to get some of these concepts done and kind of, you know, gaining traction for connectivity and gaining traction for these concepts. And so I think there is a definite gap, and something that I am actually looking forward to doing more, since I am right outside of Yellowstone. I'm in, you know, kind of the gateway community, is educating people about, you know, this is a great protected area, but we can make it stronger if it's connected. We can make it last longer if it's connected, and we can help the wildlife that live within it if it's connected. And so I'll be looking for opportunities to do that more this summer with the tourists that come in. And then Richard, I think.
Yeah, hi, thank you.
Yeah.
I set up, it's hard for me to do, but I did it. So you kind of gave a good broad overview of designing a place and logic for putting overpasses and underpasses, and, you know, where they're critically needed. I'm wondering about if you could convey a little bit of the detail of how you evaluate connectivity afterwards. And you talked about grizzly bears being a umbrella species, so obviously you want to know how well your overpass or underpass worked for not only grizzly bears, but all of those species you think would also benefit from that. What kind of evaluation goes into that, and, you know, at what point do you say that was a great success, or nobody came to that party? But, you know,
Yeah.
so obviously you want to look back. You've invested all this money. How is that evaluated?
Yeah, a key component of our work, and a key component of work in any field, right, is monitoring how are we successful? How do we know that? Right. And so specifically with the crossing, whether it's an overpass or an underpass, we'll help the state agency put up trail cameras. And so trail cameras capture when when an animal crosses in front of it. So they'll take a picture. Right. And so they'll gather data on both sides for multiple years, pre and post construction, so we can compare who and what wildlife is using that structure before versus after. And there's been some great success with that. One was up in northern Idaho, where it was an underpass, a series of box culverts that were built. And then the agency, over monitoring, realized it was used for not just deer, which was the main concern on the highway, because that's the carcasses they were picking up from roadkill. They also saw elk, they also saw black bears, and they also saw mountain lions. And they didn't know that they had resident mountain lions actually in that area. And so that was an example of, oh wow, this is a really key component for connectivity that the agency didn't know beforehand. Another indicator for success for us is land designation. So that's that green and yellow map that I showed for protected areas, and then areas with other conservation designations. Those are sort of the overarching larger numbers that help us evaluate our mission and our vision, and are we striving towards it? And we're getting better. It's really amazing the success that we've seen since 1993 when people started to work on this. And then down at the project level, we always set goals and metrics for each project that we can measure. So for like the Bees to Bears project, we wanted to see if it could help grizzly bear connectivity on either side. We saw those grizzly tracks show up in the sand. That was a moment for us where we said, this is showing us that it's working. They're actually able to get from one side to the other, where we weren't seeing that before.
So kind of a follow-up to that is using data from these evaluations, and this is sort of a question that I asked before, is presumably you can see how big the funnel is on either side of a underpass, overpass. And that, I would think, would lead to some sort of conclusion about how frequently, how far apart you need to really make it a very permeable barrier. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the data gathered so far, or obviously you're making it for deer and elk and bears. Birds probably aren't affected that much unless they're ground birds like quail and grouse. Right.
So sorry, you were wondering about that data collection?
Yeah, well, not just the data collection, but the conclusions, if you have any so far about, gee, we thought we could get away with one crossover every 10 miles, but it turns out we can really do it every 20 or 15 or 5 is what's required, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's more, it's less the concentration of the crossing structures over an area, and it's more just if that crossing structure is being used, so that one structure. And so we have numbers from state agencies that say they are being used. And so it's less looking at, do we need more and less? I'm thinking of one specific area where we actually do know that we're going to be needing some more structures there. And we know that because there are continued wildlife vehicle collisions. So we have an area on I-90 in Montana that has some small underpasses available right now, but it's not enough to really make an effect. And so, yes, that is an example where we say, okay, we're going to need a little bit more because we're hearing from the state agency, here's our wildlife vehicle collision numbers for this area. They keep going up. Maybe the fencing isn't working right. What isn't working in that area, and how can we help design it in a better way so that wildlife can get from one side to the other?
That's great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, did you have a question? I don't know if Rob is still with us or not. Well, are there any other questions?
I'm sorry, this is Jan. Sorry, I had one more. I have another, it's more really of a comment. And our January presenter was the Western Rivers Conservancy. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of them because they seem to be under the radar a lot. Have you ever heard of them, Hannah?
No.
Yeah, okay. Well, they're very successful, and their motto is sometimes to save a river, you have to buy it. So they're working a lot with fish and wildlife. They buy up entire, rivers, like the sides of both of them. They're restoring them. They're putting in stuff. They've been very successful. They worked out a way to permanently retire grazing rights. They don't usually retain ownership of the land. They transfer it. But I mention them because, I know you're talking about there's a fine line, and they have the same thing. They're working a lot with ranchers that have, cattle, and they're getting them to not let the cattle come down and, get in the rivers anymore. And so they may have, I mention them because, they may have some good ideas, because I know you guys, you're a master collaborator, actually. So,
Yeah.
if there's another organization that might help you with ideas of how they've been able to be successful at things, they, have done a really, I think, stellar job, and they're very not well known at all. But they're doing a great job and have some great ideas that maybe could benefit your project. Maybe they could even adopt a river somewhere in your area.
Yeah, that's great. And I wrote their name down, and I'm going to look into them, because the more collaborators, the better. A lot of the times we describe our work as we're kind of the general contractor. We have this big vision. We have the overall plan of what we want to see on the landscape, but how we need to build each room and all those little components that need to link together, we need other organizations like that group to help us get the work done. And another thing that I'd love to hear from you guys too, if you don't have any questions about bird connectivity and how maybe you guys think about bird connectivity on the landscape, because I'm on the call with a bunch of amazing bird people, and I'd love to learn from you too. No pressure. Don't want to put you on the spot, but if anyone has a thought,
we'll get back to you.
Okay, great.
Any other questions out there? Okay, if not, thank you very much, Hannah. We do appreciate you being here tonight. It was very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for your time, for listening to my presentation. And if you have any questions, there's
When do we
my
get to come
contact
and visit?
information. Thank you. And if you come out to the Yellowstone region, give me a call and I'd love to say hi.
You have to show your shirt. My husband's wearing his Montana shirt.
I have a direct connection.
Cover, thumbs up.
Blue ponies.
My father was born and raised in Montana, so I went to high school in Havre.
That's great. That's great. I love that. Haver's a cool place. Thank you, guys.